Okay, guys, I just wanted to go live real quick and give you what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when flipping a house. And we're going to talk about how to avoid them as well. And so, um, and look, these are mistakes that lots of people make, and they can be really extremely painful. And the number one mistake that we see people make actually is overpaying when purchasing the property. It is an absolute death trap, especially right now when deals are so competitive, right? And so, what we'll say to that is on that front, it's like one of the benefits of a super hot market is a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So, there was a flip that we had purchased 2 months ago. Now we weren't able to get started on it for various different reasons, but we got it for a good deal. But obviously, Zestimates don't really mean much. But for whatever it's worth, the Zestimate is already up by about 6% in a little under 2 months. So, it just shows you what you get, the benefit you can get from the rising tide. But at the same time, you got to be careful, right? If a property has gone up in 50%, or even in a similar area, turnkey property we had looked at, buying you know not for flipping but just for living in is 600. Now it's gone up to 780 2 months from February. That's from February to May, right? So you can imagine your flips benefiting from that, almost 160K increase. But at the same time, even if you buy at that very top and then there's a little bit of a pullback, you're going to have to eat that, right? Because the bank's not going to eat that. And so, just makes it really, really important not to chase deals, and at the same time be comfortable with the risk that you're taking, because you might have to take lower margins. So you really have to study your market, really have to know the ARVs, and you really have to go down to the sub-market level, right? You have to be within a half mile to really less than a mile radius around the area, because even on different sides of a street, especially if you're on like a main boulevard, it can be totally different marketplace, right? And so, and another way to do this is to make sure you're accounting for all the transaction costs. And so the main ones on the purchase are the title, insurance, inspections, and legal. You got your carrying costs, right? Carrying costs is funding and borrowing, insurance, taxes. And then on the sell side, you also have those transaction costs, right? You have the staging costs. Again, you have to pay the title insurance and then the legal and realtor commission fees. And then, so the second biggest mistake we see people make is actually underestimating either how much rehab is going to be needed or what the cost of that rehab is going to be. And so a lot of times that'll come in the form of missing key items that you need to do, right? We had somebody the other day who, they basically, when they took out some of the wall, they found these awful wiring issues, that they didn't know was going to be there, and that added some extra expense. And so that's why you got to include some contingencies in your budget. And so for them, luckily they had those contingencies, and the wiring issue tended not to be a good issue. And of course, it's difficult to know that before you start, but there are a lot of times when there are predictable things that that will drive up the cost, that you just have to be aware of and know that you'll replace, or just be ready to take a haircut when you go to sell it. And so, another big thing that's been hurting people right now is materials costs. Materials costs have been going up, so you have to take that into account. And then the next thing is over improving, right? So over improving the house, that's our third mistake. And so we teach that you should be working on the things that get you the highest ROI, the highest return on investment, right? And so you don't want to do things that have a low ROI, because that's going to hurt your margin. And like we said, you're already looking at thinner margins in general because of how competitive the marketplace is. And so don't use, so you don't want to use you don't want to use overly expensive materials. That's one way to avoid that. And then the other is, don't add features that the buyers won't pay for unless they're a specialty buyer, right? Like, for instance, a wine cellar or built-in refrigerators. You want to understand what your target market is, and this is a place where realtors can be super helpful. There's certain features that in certain areas are super popular. So, for instance, like if you're in Napa Valley, yeah, well, okay, fine, maybe a wine cellar is like a must-have, right? But down in Southern Florida or in Eastern Pennsylvania, a wine cellar is probably not something that you're going to really get a premium on the house for, unless you find that buyer who's absolutely going to love that, which it can sometimes be difficult to do. And then the fourth is actually not. We mentioned staging, right? Not staging, not prepping the house for sale is a huge, huge mistake that we see people do. You want to turn the house that you're selling into a hot commodity, right? You want to boost curb appeal and you want to stage the inside of the house. So when people walk in, like they're transported, they're like, wow, I could totally see myself living in this place. You know, if it's a family, I could see us raising our kids here, because people who get an emotional attachment to your house are much, 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 much more likely to buy, and not only buy, but pay a higher price, right? The same way we don't want to be emotional when we go and buy the flips to start a project. We want to create that emotion so that, you know, and right now you're going to, by creating that emotion, you're 100% going to be able to create a bidding war on your project. And you're going to be able to hopefully boost those margins from what you might have even originally thought. And so those are our top 4 mistakes, just to rehash them. Don't overpay for the project. Don't underestimate your rehab. Don't over rehab the property, and make sure that you prep it for sale so you can create that emotional connection and sell it for the maximum price. All right. See you guys next time.